Please welcome writers Christopher Markus and Stephen McFeely, and directors Anthony and Joe Russo. Hi. I'm sweating. That's okay. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Oh, there we go.
So the biggest movie ever, box office. So how does it feel after? There must have been so much pressure, and you guys delivered. Are you guys able to bask in the success?
We're not super baskers, really.
The Basker types. We're already hard at work on the next thing. Look, we've had the four of us have had an amazing collaboration over the past 7 years. We've got to do 4 movies together, and it's been the height of our creative careers in many ways, and so we're looking for the four of us are also looking forward to the future.
Yeah. But there must have been some. Was there a moment of relief that you guys delivered and that the movie was successful?
I mean, it was a lifestyle for 4 or 5 years. It wasn't even a job. It was just like this. It felt like it would never go away. Because there were 2 movies, and we moved to Atlanta for a year and a half, and it was very much, it was consuming. So to have it kind of all packaged up, sent out into the world, and liked,
Loved more than
loved.
liked.
I love it, and I love those who love it. But you rarely get a part of your life packaged and approved like that. So it's a weird thing. It's more than a job. It's like all that sweat and strain for the last 5 years was worth it. Good job, which I need once in a while.
One of the things that I greatly admire about what you guys, the four of you, did is that you created 2 films that are completely different in tone and story-wise and even genres, but they are interconnected. When was that, can you tell us the decision of both films, Infinity Wars being completely, as I said, different in tone and style and genre to Endgame? Well,
those were conversations we had very early on. We knew we were going to make 2 movies. We knew they were going to come out a year apart, and we knew we had to distinguish them. And I think when you're working in serialized storytelling, which seems to me it's going to be a significant form of storytelling moving forward, I think younger audiences crave it. They like the emotional payoff that they get for committing 10 years of their life to a narrative. They like talking about it online. Social media is a big driver about how content is going to be received moving forward. So, just from Winter Soldier to Civil War, you have to create some sort of distinction in tone and style, thematics, everything that you can in order to, move forward the serialized story without it feeling like every movie is the same thing. And I think it's good because there are very different voices that work at in that Marvel universe, from all of us to Taika Waititi, who's very different than we are, to James Gunn, who's very different than we are, to Ryan Coogler, who's very different than we are. And so going into 2 movies back-to-back, we knew we had to craft them distinctly different from one another. Of course, there's going to be an overlapping narrative. That's the point of serialized storytelling. But we knew we had to create distinctive tones and treat different characters as the leads of each film, which is why Infinity War is a movie about a villain, and Endgame is a movie about heroes. You're telling 2 different points of view in that story.
But that is a nice way to say that the second half is about heroes, but it's actually deeper than that. It's about aftermath, and it's about a lot of. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's kind of philosophical, this second half of this movie, where people have the space to ponder on
Yeah.
the aftermath. Can you talk about that, Chris and Steve?
Well, let me return to your previous question. The idea that how are we going to separate these two movies, right? We knew we had this moment in between them, and we took that very seriously. And that's what gets to the next question. We got to roll around in grief and loss. It gets to be the first part of this movie is an elegy, right? It's when do you get to do that on such a grand scale? I mean, think about Marvel said
In a commercial movie.
In a commercial movie, Marvel said we're going to make really expensive movies, and it's okay if the bad guy wins. And we took that to mean we're going to have him win not for 5 minutes. We're going to have him win for 5 years. And what does that do very realistically to, if you're treating your characters realistically, what does that do to them? How do they react? What does the 5 years mean? We didn't want to treat them all as the same football, which you can do if people have the same circumstance and you're not careful. So by allowing them, by realistically taking in the 5 years, we got to have Thor react in one way, and Black Widow react in another way, and Steve and Tony and Banner, all like that.
But also,
Go ahead.
one of the things, this amazing opportunity to work in the Marvel Universe and to do this capstone project is to take the mileage that they've been through seriously, so that it's not, the same episode again and again, and there isn't an accreted weariness on all. Like, if you just look at Steve Rogers, he's been through a lot, and you want by the final film that to all be weighing on him, and for everybody to have taken all the hits you've seen, and for that last movie to be completely conscious of everything that's come before, so that by the time you get to this end point, there's a weariness, and if you don't acknowledge it, you're invalidating what's come before. So it needed this weight and the time taken in order to say that this is real within its own boundaries.
And that's the difference between serialized storytelling and sequels, right? I think we used to think of a sequel in the 80s as just the same but 10% different, or in a new city or something.
Well, a sequel resets the character, and it starts over again, and then you tell the story but slightly different. Serialized storytelling is that it compounds as it goes. Characters retain baggage. Their emotional structure changes from movie to movie. And that's what's so fascinating about Marvel, is that this is a grand experiment in narrative that has been, tremendously successful.
And you guys did something so bold that we're not used to in a film of this scale, and an action film, to have moments of reflection where you actually slow down for people to reflect. It's you guys up there.
Oh my God.
The moments of reflection. And both to the writers and you guys, the editing and the directing, the fact that you actually carved out time for these characters to reflect.
Yeah, definitely started with the script for certainly. Look, we knew, again, I think all of us up here, I think the one thing you can trace in our work, if you go, even back before our Marvel work collaborations together, and our Marvel work is like a real dedication to character, and sort of to truthfulness in the exploration of character. And the only way you can move forward from the end, we knew what a seismic ending the end of Infinity War was, where Thanos wipes out half of all life. That's an incredible sort of experience. And that's one that requires a lot of time to process. So that reflectiveness, I think, that you're talking about was just all a product of all of our desires on a storytelling front to just really process what that means. What does that mean to people, from the highest to the lowest, from our heroes that we're following in the storytelling to random people on the street, which you see in that great scene where Cap is working as a grief counselor with a group of veterans in Endgame, where Joe plays one of the characters. So, but yeah, that was our desire to really slow down and process that experience and what it means. And the reason why we like doing that on a storytelling level is because, again, it's the focus on character. It's the focus on, and I think that's why why audiences ultimately love these characters, is the fact that they feel real and relatable and dimensional and complex, and we treat them all as if they're human beings as opposed to sort of, narrative conceits.
I mean, it's not, I don't know how many people saw it when it first came out. If you can remember, if you went opening weekend, I won't accuse any of you of doing this, but like there was probably someone in your theater crying. All right, and that doesn't happen just because it's spectacle. That happens because they've invested in 21 other movies, and when Tony Stark dies, you've just lost something you invested in 10 years. Or when Steve Rogers picks up the hammer, hell yeah, he picks up the hammer, because I know how hard that is. And that's investment. That's serialized storytelling.
It's also, and this goes back to Stan Lee in the 60s in the comics. Tony Stark died. Steve Rogers picked up the hammer. Iron Man didn't die. You are invested in the humans inside these characters so that you are following someone much like you who is going through hell. And it is not just, gosh, I wonder which superpower is going to prove most powerful, who has the beams that come out of their eyes that can be more powerful than that guy's magic stones. That's part of it, but it's fifth on the list of priorities. It is, we have taken these people through an immense amount of time, movie-wise, and and it's a tribute to the actors who play them, that they do not play them the same every time. We don't write them the same every time. It is a genuine, accreted experience.
It's incumbent on us not to waste that time.
Yeah.
You guys did.
If people get angry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
If you waste their time, they get really angry. See Game of Thrones.
Ouch.
I'm not making a comment here. I'm just pointing out that people got upset. I didn't get upset. Other people got upset.
But speaking of that, you guys did such a humongous gamble by ending the Infinity Wars where, heroes lose and Thanos wins. And then you guys didn't get to see the reaction to that film, but you already were 90% already invested on the film that we just saw. How did that work? How was it processing all of that?
It's crystal ball, right? That's it.
But there was a level where we all sort of understood the meaning of that, but there was another level, which is, I think, part of the magic of making these movies that we all love, is that you can't really predict the intensity of the audience reaction. And I think that's one thing that we realized at the end of Infinity War was how devastated people were by that ending, especially young people. Because young people who are coming to the movies for the first time, they don't have a sophisticated or cynical sort of approach to narrative. And when you kill Spider-Man to 11-year-old, you killed Spider-Man. It's like, and it's like world-shattering to them. And again, while we love that character dearly and it's world-shattering to us, just seeing how that reverberates through an audience, seeing how people process that emotionally, I think was fascinating for all of us. And that's one of the wonders of these movies too, is that it's such a theatrical experience. I mean, you see all this drama, you see this audience emotion unfold in the movie theater, and where people are experiencing this in the moment and reacting to it in the moment with really vivid and excitable emotions. I mean, the one thing that we've always said is, it's like, you go in this theater, and especially in the first few weeks of the release of these films, both with Infinity War and with Endgame, and it's like you're in a rock concert almost. Like the energy of the audience is like electric. And I've never been in a movie theater before where you get so much vocalization and energy from an audience during the course of a narrative. Exactly. And it's really amazing.
Was that challenging? And going back to my question, was it challenging that you had 90% of this current film already in development, and you had not experienced a reaction to?
I mean, this was our third and fourth movie over 7 years, sort of dealing with this scale of film, interacting with audiences around the globe. So we had a sense of what could potentially happen. We didn't know to the extent. we had about 90% in the can, but we still had some of the ending that we still had to go back and reshoot. And our process for the four of us is extremely iterative. As we're constantly receiving information and then interpreting that information in terms of the narrative, because this is a fluid narrative. It's a serialized narrative that has to interact with global audiences in a profound way, especially to get to the box office numbers that they got to. So, you have to understand the power that you have with certain characters, the narrative, the power you have in your thematics. But irrespective of how they reacted, for all of us, the mission is, at the end of the day, we know media is an exceedingly powerful tool. All the great experiences I've ever had in a movie theater involve me having an emotional experience and trying to hide that from the person who was sitting next to me. That's what you remember when you walk out of a theater is, was I impacted? Now, you can be intellectually impacted or you can be emotionally impacted. We prefer that you have both. You have as many sort of experiences as you can in that theater. So we also are all very politically savvy. We read a lot. We sit around in rooms and discuss what's happening in the world. And we try to infuse these films with something that is higher-minded in case that is what you want when you go to a theater. So you look at Winter Soldier, it's questioning governmental power. At the end of the movie, you find out that the government is actually the bad guys in that film. That then leads to Civil War. It's a very disruptive movie about two of the favorite characters in this serialized story beating the crap out of each other because they can't come to some ideological common ground. We knew that killing half the characters at the end of Infinity War would represent a significant loss, would break the paradigm of commercial movies that you've seen for, when do we want to define the start of commercial movies? In the 50s, the 60s, or 40s? I mean, when was the last time you saw a villain win a movie that cost that much money? So we knew it was going to have a significant impact, but also we believe that as part of thematics that that the good guys don't always win, and that is a great lesson. That is a great lesson to learn. It's a great lesson to be 11 years old and to walk out of a theater and feel in your bones. And then, what's important then, and you brought this up earlier about the next movie, is walking into that film and still feeling it. We doubled down. We didn't let you go. We made it painful for another hour for you. And then slowly and through great sacrifice, because that's the definition of heroism, is sacrifice, they slowly win back some level of sanity.
Yeah, but the most pointed answer to your question is no, the narrative pattern for both movies was set before Infinity War was ever experienced by audiences. And we simply didn't, and we stuck to that narrative pattern, we were just still surprised by the intensity of the emotional reaction.
I want to pick up on what you brought up about the fluid ability to mirror the shifts and the side guys, and I want to go to Christopher and Stephen about the fact that you guys have been incredibly ahead of the ball in diversity, inclusion of all the characters, and not only characters we can identify, but as I said, diversity. Can you?
Part of that is working with the Marvel Universe. Part of the high wire act of particularly the last couple movies, although we've been doing it in the last 4, is we'll be either introducing a character or receiving a character whose movie hasn't come out yet. A good example is, Infinity War. The third act in Infinity War takes place in Wakanda. When we decide to do that, I'm pretty sure there's not a Black Panther script, right? So we're banking on the idea that audiences are going to love that movie enough, a blockbuster movie with a nearly all African American or African cast, and they're going to love it enough so that when you hear little drums where he says, "I know a place," right, you already are excited when it cuts to Wakanda. There's not a slam dunk that that's going to be the case. We have confidence in Marvel, and we have confidence in ourselves that that's the right place for the movie to go, because you needed a genius in a secret place, and we're better. But if we were to panic about that, if we were to second guess those kind of decisions, because we were worried that people wouldn't want to go see black faces or something, we would just be cutting good storytelling off. So I'm really proud of Marvel for pushing the ball forward on that and widening the aperture for blockbuster Hollywood storytelling. And it's pretty clear that it's working. Captain Marvel made a ton of money. Black Panther made a ton of money.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, you know, as odd as it may seem for movies that feature a 12-foot-tall purple man and things like that, realism really is one of the things that keeps this alive and fresh. And we live in a diverse world. And you want to bring in as many different kinds of people as you can, as you see in daily life. I mean, there's no reason to exclude people for some sort of box office reason. I mean, thank God people have figured out, oh, other people go to movies. But it's also, the Marvel movies do not work unless they have real people, and there's just a great many different kinds of real people out there.
You know, on that same note, the fact that you mentioned that you introduced Wakanda and the audience hadn't seen the Black Panther, what was it like, both directorially and writing-wise, the fact that Captain Marvel, for example, she is in Endgame, but we still hadn't seen her standalone, you know, film. Was that a challenge, or was
sort
that
of
a plus?
It was obviously, it was weird. It was a blank slate in a way because we were writing a character. If you know that movie, it's a 90s movie. So we were writing a character who was going to be 20-something years along from a movie that hadn't been written yet or shot. And so when we started shooting, you guys can testify to this, it was Brie Larson's first day as the character was in Endgame. So we talked to Anna and Ryan, the directors, and said, hey, is this character possibly, can this person possibly be the kind of person who would be, she would be 20 years after the movie you guys haven't written yet? And they went, yeah, I think she'd be more or less like that. Sure, knock yourself out. So in some ways, it was a bit of a blank slate. We just had, but most importantly, and Joan Anthony in particular on this, she has to work for our movie. We can't handcuff her to some vague, unwritten thing yet. So she had to be a strong, powerful, confident character who came in and said, what the hell's going on? Let's fix this. Oh, we can't fix this.
By the way, this is an interesting question because Captain Marvel, for instance, stands in contrast to Black Panther or Spider-Man, who the four of us introduced in Civil War, those two characters.
Yeah.
So we didn't have a challenge on Civil War with either Black Panther or Spider-Man, because at that point in the storytelling and with the way that Marvel was rolling out their films, we had firm control over what those characters, there was nothing predestined about those characters whatsoever when we were working with them in Civil War. We were literally creating their roads forward at that moment. Whereas when we were doing the Avengers movies, the Captain Marvel movie was a little closer to the production period. So it became a little more complicated in terms of like how we were, and also her role in the Avenger movies was slightly less perhaps pronounced than Spider-Man's role or Black Panther's role was in Civil War. So there's a little bit more of an ambiguity in terms of how we were using the character, and that was challenging.
But it's also, there's an advantage to it. I mean, one of the reasons these two movies are able to fit so many characters in, and so much plot, and so many events, and keep it all at pace, is because they're preset up in the universe. I'm not saying we could coast on that, but I'm saying there is
Shorthand.
A shorthand and an audience familiarity with the concept of the character that by the time they hit these two Avengers movies, you can go right into your plot without having a setup scene of, I'm Tony Stark, I'm a very rich man, I happen to be smart.
We take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It's not a liability. We think it's a strength. Again, I'll go back a couple of movies. If you saw Civil War, when Tony Stark says, I have an idea about who to bring onto the team, and it cuts to Queens. Now, if you're a super fan, you might giggle and go, oh, I know who lives in Queens. But more importantly, you see a kid walking down a hallway with a backpack. You know, as a human who lives in America, a little bit about Spider-Man. Even if you don't like it or you're not a comic book person, you know he was bitten by a radioactive spider. We don't have to tell you that. So we can jump like I don't know, an act and a half worth of storytelling because we assume you already know that. And I think that's why that introduction is pretty rich, because it respects the audience. It says, we're not going to belabor this because we know you know a little bit about him.
No, but in layman terms, because my head, when I was watching this, especially this latest film, my head was exploding a little bit. How is it possible that you guys managed to track all the arcs of so many characters and so many storylines? I mean, do you guys have this Excel sheet and storyboards and photographs? And
These
guys can detail,
I'm
but
obsessive compulsive. Yes.
let me also say this too. Before these guys should answer this question, but also let me know no one has written more of the Marvel Cinematic Universe than these two gentlemen right here. So when you're saying how do you track those characters, these guys have been at the center of that narrative.
I mean, whether you're a fan of superhero films, but any fan of cinema has to see what you guys four have achieved. And it's mind-boggling. The tracking 20 films and 11 years of history and all this characters and seamlessly tell a fluid story. I cannot imagine what your war room looked like.
Like a serial killer's lair. I mean, quite literally.
Exactly
Just
like
If
that.
a serial killer used 3x5 cards.
Many do, from what I understand. Just, I mean, on a very mundane level, color coding different colored cards, different colored markers, tracking different characters through drafts, but also starting with the characters. We assembled on the wall a card for every character we had access to, either in the films or that we knew in the comics could come into this storyline, and put them all on the wall before we had a plot, and just went, there's really interesting story left here, particularly if that person meets this person. I've never seen those two people together. That would be funny. And from profound storylines to very, sort of laughable storylines develop as you just visually put the characters together. And then structurally, we were lucky enough in both movies to be able to break the quests, if you want to call them that, down into 3 paths, so that we did not have to move an auditorium full of people from scene to scene to scene. You would have Group A, Group B, and Group C, so that you could tell smaller stories and show their personal reactions to things, because it wasn't every 5 minutes a boardroom scene where I also have to say something contractually.
Here, where you take a roll call at the beginning of everything. Yeah.
By the way, I also want to mention too, for as difficult as these movies are to make, and for as much time as they take to make, nothing consumes more time in the process than what they're talking about right now. That's the hardest part.
Months in a room. A lot of it's spent with the 4 of us sitting there. It requires an extreme amount of discipline and focus, and a lot of donuts. And you sit there for hours on end discussing things that can unify the film. Typically, the way that will work is thematics are very important. So what are we trying to say? How are we going to tie these two movies together? Well, the thematics, if you go back and look at these movies, are we predestined, or through sheer force of will, can you alter your fate? That's exactly what those films are about. Predestiny wins at the end of Infinity War. Through sheer force of will, they're able to alter their fate by the end of Avengers Endgame. That is a unifying factor that can hold our narrative together. And secondarily, as we start to play around with the characters, there are characters who are lead characters of the Marvel Universe. Tony Stark and Robert Downey, I would argue, are the lead character, right? And we knew that Tony was going to die, so you can start building narrative around Tony, and that becomes a unifying factor. And then how do people interact with that? We know Captain America is a lead character. We knew Black Widow is a lead character and was going to die. So once you start tracking those stories, then what happens is you get a draft out, and it tends to be focused on the primary characters. Then we sit in a room, and we'll spend a day or two just focusing on one character, one of the supporting characters, read through the draft, weave them into the story,
No.
focus on the next character.
It's better there. It was, yeah, okay.
But I think what's compelling about this and what we've been dancing around a little bit is that these two movies, you guys were saying this earlier, this is disruptive storytelling because I don't know if ever in movie history we've been able to tell a story where all of the characters have been set up prior to, and we're talking about 40 characters, I think, in Endgame, where you don't have to do the traditional heavy lifting of character introductions. So your real estate can be occupied by character work and characters' emotional responses to events.
Can you clarify the usage of disruptive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, look, we all work in a business where there are paradigms, and those paradigms are fixed, and they're fixed because the audience seems to react to those. Now, I would say that the advent of Netflix and Amazon and Apple, these trillion-dollar companies that are throwing a lot of cash at narrative structure, we're starting to see an evolution. But it's been 100 years that we've had, a 2-hour structured narrative. That's what you traditionally go see when you go to a theater. And what happens in a 2-hour traditional structure, and this is where people are, ranked as, either quality screenwriters or not quality, is how well you can execute within that model, or whether you can be disruptive in that model. Now, you can only be disruptive to a certain point because you still have to introduce a character, introduce a problem, have an inciting incident, have a second act that where the character struggles with the problem of the movie, and a third act where it either resolves or it doesn't resolve. If it's an art house film, it tends not to resolve, or it resolves with thematics, right? This is a slightly different structure because you're coming in and we've already done the setup. And you already know what the inciting incident is because it happened in the prior film. So it's a new style of structure, and that's why I think the movie did so well, is because just from a personal perspective, the market is craving something different. And I think younger audiences are pushing us now because this generational gap between us and them is as significant as any we think we've seen in history, just from a technology standpoint, information standpoint, a behavioral pattern standpoint. They are very, very, very different than we are, and that requires different kinds of storytelling.
Well, they've been, again, the thing I think to remember about the youth today who drive a portion of the fandom for this movie is that they have been inundated with content. They have had more access to content than any generation previous to them. They can get movies easier than we ever could as we were growing up. So because of that, they've consumed more content than we ever did growing up, and therefore they are more savvy about what content is and what content does than we ever were growing up. So you have a very sophisticated young audience right now that you have to find new ways to surprise and subvert, and it's critical. And I think that is, part of the weirdness of these movies is because they were so successful, you look at their success and you go, oh, of course, that was, this is how it happens. But if you go back 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it is, you could never have predicted this back then. So that's the catch.
And were you guys aware of this as you were writing and creating, that this is unprecedented in the history of cinema, that you have 20 plus films in an 11-year journey, and that you guys are crystallizing this whole path?
I mean, I've said before that Kevin Feige is sort of Irving Thalberg in a way, right? He's a very smart, young producer who has been thinking outside of the box, and his success speaks for itself. And I'm interested in the coffee table book that's going to come out 10 years from now about how this got done, because it's not that easy to do. And I think you've already seen other studios try to do it and not succeed. I want to just say that we don't sit there and think. Joe is absolutely right. I mean, he's very eloquent on this. The idea that your random 15-year-old there has seen far more Act 1s, Act 2s, and Act 3s in his life than I did at age 15, right? So it's incumbent upon us to challenge that. So that 15-year-old is not thrown when Act 1 of Endgame was a year before. Like it literally, Infinity War is Act 1 of this movie. And we found that exciting and not a liability in any way. And I think that's why this movie works, is because we were able to just sort of take that under our arm and run with it.
Anthony and Joe, I want to ask you about the fact that with the Captain America and Winter Soldier, you actually, made it a political thriller, and it was a huge turning point in this movie, is that you actually brought it into the modern world. Can you tell us about that transition with that film?
Yeah, I mean, that one was, we had a varied upbringing. We started off loving movies because our father would let us stay up late and watch The Late Show with him because he loved movies. So we'd watch The Maltese Falcon and the Bowery Boys, all the Bogart films. Then as we started to get a little into our teen years, we started watching the political thrillers of the 70s as they would show up on television. The French Connection, we saw many, many times, 3 Days of the Condor, etc. So when we were asked to do a comic book film, we were also comic book collectors, so they had a significant emotional space in our childhood, and we liked we'll keep using this word because it's a word we use all the time, but we liked more disruptive stories in that space. So I collected comics in the 80s when there was an independent scene that was starting to flip the golden age characters on their head. They were dragging them into the real world. They were giving them real problems. They were saying these guys, these men and ladies aren't as good as you think they may be. They have flaws. That was compelling to me. So I grew up at a period where that was being examined. And so when they asked us to come in and work on Winter Soldier, we wanted to bring a level of psychological realism to the character. We wanted to bring thematics in because thematics are important to us, because that's how you get out of bed every day to make a hard movie, is you have to care. And you have to care about what you're doing, and you have to feel like you're doing something that has some sort of reach. And we knew these movies had significant global reach. And in fact, probably one of the highlights of our career was making Winter Soldier in a country that doesn't have as much freedom as this country does. And a fan came up to us and said, I can't believe you're able to make this movie, because we could never make this movie here because we're not allowed to criticize the government. And ultimately, Winter Soldier is just sort of an examination of how much power should the government have, because we never know whose hands that government is going to fall into. So we have to be careful. And so the movie does ask a lot of questions, on top of which has, really intense action and hopefully grounded characters in costumes interacting with each other.
But that film was a catalyst to the way that the Marvel, the rest of the movies, developed.
I think people responded to that tone. And I think they responded to this level of edge that we brought to that film, where it was self-aware about the fact that it was a comic book film, but it was trying to be a little bit more high-minded. It was trying to be self-reflexive. It was trying to both, undermine the genre and celebrate it at the same time. And I think that audiences prefer that level of edge, and they prefer what can be a sophistication in terms of the way that you tell a story in a genre.
Also, I think it's important to remember, we were hired to direct that movie just before the first Avengers movie came out. So once that first Avenger movie came out, a month after we were hired, and it reached that massive level of success that it reached, I think that was the moment that became very clear to us. And by the way, I should say a lot of the dive for this was set by Chris and Steve prior to our entry into the process. But just speaking from our own point of view, as we entered the process, seeing how successful that first Avenger movie was, we knew the vitality of moving forward with this serialized storytelling was bringing something to the table that was completely different from what the audiences had seen up to that point in the narrative. Even though what they had seen up to that point in the narrative, in the collective narrative of the MCU, was wonderful and surprising and fascinating and interesting and innovative. And, all superlatives, we knew that like the only way forward from that, especially as new storytellers coming into the process, was to do something completely different from what had been done before. So that was very much our focus on Winter Soldier, was how do we fashion a movie that has a tonal quality and a stylistic quality that is different and subversive to what this MCU has been up to this moment.
That's what Marvel did going forward after that. I mean, there's a direct line from Winter Soldier to everything they did afterwards. You don't get Black Panther, you don't get Guardians, you don't get Thor Ragnarok, which is crazy town, unless Marvel decides, oh, we can keep breaking this and putting it back together.
Well, they're very smart about knowing that the more movies they make, the more different they have to be. I mean, you cannot crank out. They do crank them out, and I use crank in a non-pejorative sense. They make a lot of movies. But it is not a factory. It is, each one is handcrafted and made to be different. And I do think Winter Soldier was probably in the lead on that.
I have 20,000 questions, but I'm going to have to start to wrap it up. But Christopher and Stephen, writing Tony Stark, which is such a complicated and flawed character, can you tell us about writing about him in this edition, and then putting Captain America in the forefront at the story, and then the third and last, Black Widow, the fact that she's an isolated character and she has trust issues in how you wove it in her character.
All three of them are probably on a span of talkativeness, Tony being the most, Black Widow being the least. Tony is a lot of fun to write in that he says everything. He doesn't keep a lot inside. It all bubbles out and it comes out of his mouth. So you can use a lot more words than sometimes you can with other characters, because he is a reflexive talker, as is Robert. And Robert and Tony it's pretty hard to pry the two apart. But there's also, it's been written about before, but the sort of crossed arcs of Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, where Tony is coming to a place of real responsibility and sacrifice. And to see that peeking through the wise ass, and to see him getting more and more gravity as time goes on is truly satisfying. And to see Steve Rogers realizing, it's very easy for him to sacrifice, to see him realize that that's not all there is, and that in fact he is a better hero if he has a personal life. If you keep those in the back of your mind, every single time you have those two on screen, you can be tweaking those arcs and bringing that. You could have a scene where Captain America gets a mission, takes it, and rushes off, and that's all it is. But you could have a scene where Captain America, Steve Rogers, gets the mission and knows it's another one, and knows he has to take it, and knows a big part of him would be better served not taking it. But he's going to take it anyway because that's who he is, and that it's going to cost him, but he's going to do it anyway. And the same thing with Tony. To know that it would be easier for him to coast out and be a billionaire, and to feel the responsibility growing, and he feels sacrifice coming in this movie. That's why he records his own eulogy early, because he knows he has become something other than he used to be. And it's such a gift to have that bubbling in the background when you're writing a story. To know that, okay, there's some real development going on here that we have to, pour into the background of every scene.
It's been the beauty of long form storytelling, and some of it is other writers and directors, but lately it's been us. We realized that Tony was on a journey where to be complete in a way he might have to lose his life, and Steve was on a journey where to be complete he'd have to get one, and we went, oh, that sounds good. We should try to run at that. Natasha was different, and it was challenging. Sorry, I don't want to be long-winded, but you asked about Natasha. She resists long speeches about her backstory. She's, not hilarious. She's hard-bitten. She's had a lot, as Joss wrote, she's had a lot of red in her ledger. So the 5 years to her, we wanted to contrast her a little bit with Steve Rogers. If you notice in that scene with all the holograms, or the peanut butter sandwich scene, right? Steve is suggesting that he might give up. Right? That maybe we don't need to do this anymore. And it's Natasha who holds on, right? One, because she's a hero, and two, because she's had nothing for so long to hold on to. And she got the Avengers, and that became her family. We really wanted to underline that because we knew that she was going to be a hero again, problematic, right? We're killing the first lady of the Marvel universe. We didn't take that lightly. Undoubtedly, there was going to be blowback to that. But we knew it was an honorable sacrifice, and it was for the world, and it was for the people that she'd come to love. And we found that nothing more noble than that. So we always drove at that.
And my last question to the Russo brothers. I was in awe of Charles Wood, your production designer, and how he was able to tie all these different galaxies, all these different worlds in this film. And in particular, I admire the Tokyo sequence, which is so aggressive and introduces the new Ronin-like Jeremy Renner. Can you tell us about working with Charles?
Sure. I love your choice of words, being in awe, because I think that's our same reaction to working with Charlie Wood, is being in awe. He's an incredible talent. He's a visionary production designer. And we love, a large part of our process has always been, we love to explore ideas. I think that's part of the nature of why Joe and I like to work as a team, is because we can sit with one another all day long and just sort of bat ideas back and forth and twist them and turn them and challenge one another with thoughts that we couldn't have had on our own. And that's why there's some energy to that collaboration that we find very valuable. And I think that Charlie Wood is an excellent example of a collaborator, as are these guys, that sort of feeds that same energy, because he loves to go on deep dives about what something can mean creatively. And the capacity that he has to go on a deep dive, because he is such a talented graphic artist, is stunning and amazing. So, if I could tell you about the months and months of work that we've done with Charlie, which again is very similar to the months and months of work that we do together, that never actually ends up on screen, but is like a critical part of the creative exploration in terms of what we can do with these characters, where we can take the story, what the possibilities are, how we can surprise ourselves, how we can surprise audiences in ways that we had never imagined. And that there is so much work that gets done that again never shows up on screen. But Charlie's an amazing talent. He's as an important cornerstone to what these movies have been as anything.
And I'll just wrap it up with this, because these things don't get made without an incredible team of collaborators. Charlie, Jeff Ford, our editor. This is as complicated as a narrative as you could possibly put together as an editor. Dan DeLue, our VFX supervisor, who did 12,000 VFX shots in 6 years over the films that we did. And Trent
Oplok,
cinematographer.
Music is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Alan
Silvestri, his score is
The score is
incredible. It's a beautiful score for a film, and there are sequences in this movie that would not work without the score, and I think that's a true testament to a score. Robert Downey, who I think brought the world to tears, is a very difficult thing to do in this world today, to get 300 people in a movie theater in Shanghai crying at the same time that they're crying in Singapore, that they're crying in London, that they're crying in Madrid, and it's a unifying performance. These guys, you have to, Chris and Steve, you have to understand, you have to master the 3-act structure in order to break it and disrupt it and do something that nobody's ever done. that requires an incredible amount of mastery of the craft. And I would say that, the movie's unprecedented in that regard. It is a structure that I don't think you could go point to another film and go, oh yeah, they watched this and stole the structure from that. It doesn't exist. It's never happened in movie histories where we've gotten, 21 films made up of a bunch of different franchises all woven together into a culminating story. It's crazy when you think about it.
By the way, sorry, I just want to go back to your question as well. For Charlie, especially with that scene in Japan where we reintroduced Hawkeye, the scene that you mentioned, that scene was shot in Atlanta. That was a couple of blocks in Atlanta that Charlie took over and transformed in the most jaw-dropping, remarkable way we'd ever seen. And of course, it was all supported by a very elaborate visual effects addition with Dan DeLue. But that's the thing, is like, it's the dedication to detail and the pursuance of possibility in even the smallest moments of the film. I think that.
And they tell you about character, like the simplicity of the Ronin-like costume tells you the change of Jeremy that he's gone through.
Yeah.
It's congratulations, guys, and thank you so much for being here. We're so fortunate.